And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have a returning good brother to the temple. One we had covered quite a long time ago when he was kickstarting this particular project, the Celtic-themed campaign setting for D&D 5e known as Heroes of Terra. Now that it is officially out and completed, it is high time to do the comeback tour. The one and only Jacob Duerksen. How you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing well, Mildred. Thank you so much for having me on. And yes, this is a long overdue return. Thank you so much for having me on that first time so long ago. It was a big help with the Kickstarter campaign, and thank you for having me back now.
It's always my pleasure to do these kind of things. And admittedly, there is going to be some stuff that might be treaded over because that interview was maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
Definitely going on 4.
But
yeah, the production of the book took quite a while. You know, it just took me down some unexpected paths, kind of grew beyond what I first anticipated. It really ran away with me. And I was also learning some hard lessons along the way. I had never published so much as a pamphlet before jumping into the deep end with this book. So there were some misadventures and some lessons learned, but finally here we are, thanks to the graciousness of a very, very patient audience of supporters as well as new members to the Heroes of Terra community.
So, and I will admit that I'm coming at this completely fresh because obviously I was not on the ground regarding a lot of the changes that ended up happening. So because the last thing that I had was that initial I guess alpha.
I think you could call it an alpha. Yeah, it was, if I recall, the first demo document I was putting out was still pretty much in the form of, as I had it on my Word document, just translated to a PDF file. But it has certainly gone beyond that. Let's say, I think when I initially launched the Kickstarter, I was expecting it to be only about 250 pages. And I was already very close to that mark at the time. It was not 100% complete, but I thought, oh, a few more months of polishing and we'll have this out within a year. Well, now that it is out, I can tell you, rather than 250-ish pages, we are at 406 pages. And that was... I don't even really know where those extra pages came from. They just kind of slipped their way in somehow.
They slip their ways in, but that is how these things kind of work. At some point, they kind of escape us.
Yeah, there was really nothing I could do about it. I was held captive to the whole process.
Oh yeah, and I suppose one of the big things is I think I may have mentioned this to you in the past, but did you provide a bit of a pronunciation guide, since dealing with Celtic terminology and just the vowel structure is going to be a bit of an adjustment period for some.
Oh yeah, no, that will be people will find that in Appendix J of the book, is all about Irish pronunciation, where I spend the first pages laying out just the basic rules like you might get in grammar school, and then followed up by a good fair spread of a list of Irish words with pronunciations spelled out not in any objective like international phonetic alphabet, because those are usually pretty decipherable with all of their arcane symbols. Instead, they're just kind of phonetically spelled out to the best of my ability. And I do provide a disclaimer at the end of that appendix where I say I am not fluent in Irish, but, research was pursued with best efforts. The work was checked by a few Irish speakers of varying proficiency, and they all gave it a pass.
Mhm.
So I'm just putting it out there simply as my own best shot at trying to help along other novices, but I can't really claim much more than that. But I think I did a pretty good job.
Yeah. And when it comes to that whole thing of expertise, I'm reminded of something I said when I was reviewing a bunch of wuxia RPGs. Where I said, full disclosure regarding pronunciation: I am not an expert, and also neither are you.
Right, we're all in this together.
Mm-hmm. And neither is your table.
Yeah, there's always going to be someone who thinks so.
Because I was seeing some people pop off about how you should be using proper pronunciation, which is certainly something to strive for. But when you're dealing with a full table full of people, it's a little bit unreasonable, in my not so humble opinion, to expect that from folks. To expect that from a whole table.
In my experience, oftentimes if you do have a difficult word, the table will just kind of communally settle on their preferred pronunciation, whether it is correct or not, and then simply for the sake of expediency, that's the word now. At least as far as this table is concerned, we just got to roll with it from there.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to something like Heroes of Tara, you really, everybody is picking up a book like Heroes of Tara because they want the genuine thing. They want to be brought as close to the real deal as they can be. So I, use them or not, I try to put all the tools that I can in this book for people to have an authentic, immersive experience in ancient mythical Ireland. Not just like Celtic inspired, but actually your characters are taking part in the ancient recorded stories that we have from pre-Christian Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
Or, well, let's say not from pre-Christian Ireland, because to be a little pedantic, the written sources are from medieval Ireland. We don't have anything written from pre-Christian sources, unfortunately. But that's itself a whole fascinating aspect that I find space to go into in the back of the book as well.
Mm-hmm.
The whole matter of, grappling with the sources and, how close to authentic can we be, and is this actually ancient mythology or is it medieval literature, and what's the distinction and why is the distinction important?
Yeah.
Even if you never play a game with this book, there's a lot of interesting topics that it covers that I think anybody would find stimulating.
And of course, whenever it comes to the authenticity debate, I've been very neutral on that. Just primarily saying, you can make it you can make it as authentic as you like, but at the end of the day, this is still a game.
Yes, absolutely.
And
I mean, that's actually somewhere in the book, I go close to that phrase where I say, at the end of the day, this is a game. Players are not here to visit a museum, so some compromises do have to be made. And even there, I'm transparent about the creative liberties, the compromises, the cuts and trimming that maybe I'd have to take here and there. Because, mythology is a messy thing. But when you're trying to bring to life a fictional setting for players to play in so that they can imaginatively invest themselves, that setting needs to have some internal consistency and logic, which is not always mythology's strong suit. So, some conflicts are going to have to be reconciled, especially since I'm taking from myths that span several centuries. So there's like a melding of timelines. Like, who is the ruler of the Hill of Tara? Who's the High King of Ireland at this time? Well, we go into all that, we answer all these questions, and in one of the appendices, I go into the transparency about the choices I made so that the players can understand fact from fiction, so that they can be informed, so that we can play with our creative liberties while still respecting the source material. Because ultimately this whole book was written with just, complete love, admiration, and respect for the source material, and just kind of wanting to glorify the source material to a modern audience in a way. Not necessarily glorify all the things that go on in the source material, because again, mythology, it could be messy sometimes. One of the mechanics in this game is headhunting, and that doesn't necessarily mean that I endorse the practice of headhunting. So when I say glorify, I mean just, the poetry, the passion, the theatricality, and the aesthetics of it.
Yeah.
And deeper cultural meaning as well. It's just all so rich, and I'm really excited to be bringing this to players.
Mm-hmm. And I think anybody who's approaching this honestly is going to be aware of that.
Right.
I know some people try and pull some sort of gotcha with these sort of setting things, or in the worst case scenario, try and do so to insert themselves as a quote unquote consultant, which is even more slimy, if I'm being honest. Saying, this thing has all these problems. You need to hire me to have these problems fixed, as a way to try and get their foot in someone's door.
Yeah, nice book you have there. It would be a shame if somebody found it problematic. Yeah.
Yeah, which I've I think at one point somebody approached me with one of my old projects about that, and I basically said, "Impress me with your indignation."
Well,
which is just
thankfully
a fancy way of saying "try me, bitch."
Oh, sure, but yeah, honestly, Heroes of Tara has really not attracted any such controversy. Because honestly, I think when people take a look at it, they can really tell that it was just made with genuine goodwill and intent to just take the source material and present it, perhaps not as objectively as possible, because we've already covered that compromises and liberties were taken here and there, but just as honestly and as transparently and as kind of heartfelt as possible, because I do have a genuine love for the source material, and I think people detect that, when they go through the book here. So thankfully, I've not been approached by anybody in bad faith. Everybody has just gathered around this book to share in the appreciation of these wonderful stories and these cultural artifacts.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things is having an understanding of how to make the setting more Celtic. Because obviously when it comes to the template of generic fantasy, there's some elements of it, but it has to share space with a bunch of other things. But
right.
I think
because at the end of the day, even though I put a Celtic coat of paint on it, we're still working with D&D's Vancian magic, that sort of thing.
Which, if I'm being honest, that's if I'm running Heroes of Terra personally, that's one of the things I'm going to be addressing.
Right. Now, I do try to massage it a little bit, where there is one main spellcasting class, the Philly, and they don't start with a spell list. They actually only acquire their spell list at level 3 when they choose their subclass. The subclasses kind of determine your spell list. But then, aside from that, once you do start casting spells at that level, there are ability checks to, you got to meet the DC in order for the spell to go off.
Mm-hmm.
And if you roll a nat 1, there's a bit of a backlash. So I don't think that's necessarily a Celtic aspect. That's not something that's necessarily bringing any kind of Celtic flavor to the table. But it is a bit more grounded in a way, perhaps, you might say, in the general roleplay idea of you are negotiating with spirits, the gods, that sort of thing. Because in a setting like this, there's really no difference between arcane magic or, magic granted by a patron. It's all one and the same. You know, I did away with religion and arcana skills, and they are represented by druid lore, where just religion and magic are kind of one and the same. So it's this whole idea of negotiating with the powers that be in the universe, and that kind of paints over the Vancian spell slots, perhaps, but you still do have the spell slots and the spell levels, etc.
Oh yeah. And when it comes to when it comes to that whole arcane and divine spells thing, if I'm being honest, there was barely a similarity between them, anyways. Or barely,
Right,
not a similarity,
functionally.
barely a difference between them. And I've always advocated for, if you're gonna have them be separate like that, then there should be a fundamental difference.
Right. Yeah, mechanically there is no real distinction, aside from maybe whether you get to prepare your spells at the end of a short rest or not. Honestly, that's about it. Or whether you prepare your spells, or if you have a memorized list.
Yeah, which isn't much.
No, not really.
But now I believe that there are a few skills that were added to account for the fact that Arcana, History, and Religion were axed. You have instead Bardic Verse, Breton Law, Chariot Driving, and the aforementioned Druid Lore.
Yes. Yeah, and so Chariot Driving is just kind of more off on its own. It's its own thing, where that is a lot more of a skill for, say, the martial-focused characters, because it's mostly the warriors who are going to be driving the chariots. Though, of course, Ophelia can take the reins of a chariot as well, but strength is the modifying stat for chariot driving, because you're really going to have to pull on the reins to control these wild horses, you know. But as for the other three, Bardic Verse, Brehon Law, and Druidic Lore, they all kind of form this constellation together, where earlier I said that the Philly, who is the spellcasting class, we only have 3 classes in this game, but it's the subclasses of each class that I think really bring in the diversity of choice and character progression, where you don't get a spell list until 3rd level when you're choosing your Philly subclass, and which subclass you choose which one you choose determines which spell list you get access to. And then the skills are actually the Bardic Verse, the Brehon Law, Druid Lore. Those are the skills that you're rolling when you cast your spells. And of course, depending on which subclass you've chosen, that determines which one is your spellcasting ability, which is the skill you have to be rolling. And it's all back towards informing the roleplay, making the world a bit more of an immersive thing. Bardic Verse is an equivalent to History, because History has also been removed. But it's also got something a little bit different. There is a small, 1-page, 2-page chapter in the book where we, of course, describe the flavors, the functions, and the backgrounds of these new skills and what they can be used for and in what contexts. So Bardic Verse is kind of delivered as History Plus. It is not just the ability to recall historical fact, but it's also the ability to deliver this information to others and to do it in a performative way that, maybe you can even incorporate a performance check in along with your Bardic Verse check. But it's all just to the idea of making these classes a bit more grounded in a very specific setting. You can't find these classes outside of the setting of Heroes of Tara.
And speaking of classes, is it a case here where some of the core classes in 5e just would not be compatible, and if so, which ones?
So I really gave no thought to balancing Heroes of Tara with anything outside of itself. The core classes were really not consulted much when designing these classes. Obviously, any player group is free to incorporate material from other sources as they please, but disclaimer: there's really no precedent for how that's going to affect the balance of the game. I will say, I think in general, if I had to estimate, uh, Heroes of Tara characters, might say pound per pound or character per character, are maybe a bit more beefy than your typical 5e characters, at least as far as marshals go. If anything, actually, in the caster arena, Feely might be a bit more nerfed than your base class casters. So Heroes of Tara kind of has an internal balance where the casters, the Feely, have been brought down a little bit, where the marshals have actually been raised up, so they are all kind of actually meeting in the middle just a bit
Which
more.
I know some caster mains might cry foul about being nerfed. To that, all I have to say is good.
Yeah,
As somebody
so
who's
like
put up with entitled ass caster mains for decades, I have no sympathy.
yeah, if you play a Philly, there are only going to be maybe a few damage dealing spells in the spell list. I think you have inflict wounds as a level 1. That's available to all spell lists, I believe. And then there's call lightning, and you have a few cantrips like acid splash, that kind of thing. But aside from that, yeah, the options to inflict damage with magic are severely curtailed. There's no fireball, and that is to the purpose of kind of simulating the setting, because this sort of setting is just not the sort of place where you're gonna see a fireball blast out of a wizard's hand and immolate a whole group of enemies. Magic is a bit more subtle than that, a bit more ethereal. Yeah, much less than the typical Vancian, lightning coming out of Darth Palpatine's fingertips. There's a lot more mysticism and misty, shrouded mystery aesthetics kind of wound up with how magic is presented in this setting.
Mm-hmm.
And and marshals have more mythical abilities about them. It's not just that they can attack once, an extra time per round, or that they're uh, I don't know. It's actually so difficult to bring an example to mind for what a fighter can do, because they're just so boring in basic D&D.
Yeah,
Whereas in contrast,
this has
oh
been
yeah,
a
go ahead.
problem that I have talked about extensively over the years of the fighter being treated as Babby's first character.
Right, it's the one that you just give to the new character at the table, and as soon as they've graduated from that, they can get a more cool character with all the bells and whistles or whatever.
Mm-hmm. And
But oh, go ahead. I
I don't
apologize.
when the big problem I've always had with that is when we look at martial characters in any manner of fiction, whether it be pop culture or old myths, you have fighters that pretty much laugh in the face of that narrative of, oh, fighters aren't supposed to be powerful, which just breeds as cope to me.
Right. It's just a very simple thing of, they don't need to be fancy because they have raw strength and brawn, and they got the grit that will pull the party through the combat. And it's like, yeah, that's nice conceptually. I mean, that's a cool thematic description. But then in actual practice, you're not really doing much that's all that, engaging. And you know what? In an older edition, when you're dungeon crawling in second edition, that's not such a big deal. That's what you're signing up for when you play, first or second edition, or go as far back as chainmail. Just the simple brawny guy with a sword and a shield, perfect. But once you've made it to fifth edition, and monks are spending key points, and dragonborn sorcerers are just bouncing off the walls. The fighter just needs a bit more to keep up. And that was
a lot
oh
of
sure,
a lot
go
of
ahead.
that mindset comes from the wargaming scene. where the fighter
Yeah.
was meant to be like your frontline foot soldier.
Right.
But you
It's a
have
dirty job, but somebody's got to do it.
you have whole generations who got into TTRPGs who do not have any background with wargaming. That's
They have
always
more.
in my-
They have more background with Avengers films.
They have more background with just TTRPGs. Period. They didn't play war games.
Right, and or World of Warcraft and video games, and there's just so much more media that is informing these tastes.
Mhm. Uh-oh.
And that's perfectly fine, absolutely. So in fifth edition does kind of have this reputation among the old school, and I find myself always somewhere in the middle. I like to walk that line between new school and old school. I respect
I find
all
the
forms of
distinction to
play.
be kind of silly.
Yes, that's also a very good stance to take. I suppose when speaking to a broad audience, it's maybe helpful in the short term to kind of place yourself somewhere on that political compass. Not political, but you get what I mean.
Tribal.
But yeah, tribal compass. There we go. That's a good way to put it. Thank you. But yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly merit to both, and but to that point, fifth edition does have this reputation as like being super powered, and oh, it's just an Avengers movie and all that. Whatever,
Which
that's fine. That's fun.
I'd be willing
But,
to buy. I'd be willing to buy that if it weren't for the fact that I heard that exact same argument 25 years ago with third edition. And I've
Right.
seen articles saying that about second edition.
And I don't think my characters in 5th edition are all that overpowered. I mean, maybe I'm not min-maxing, but I get my butt kicked pretty regularly with my home group, so I'm satisfied with the challenge.
Bringing
It's
the whole superhero argument. Whenever I hear that, I'm wondering, is the person there even aware of how a given game actually works? I'm reminded of the D&D 4th edition. Oh, it's just tabletop WoW argument, and some people getting really defensive at me when I said, if you really think that, then you don't know shit about how MMOs actually work.
yeah. Still no threat management or anything like that.
There's no
Certainly
no aggro management. There isn't the same sort of gimmick redesign when it comes to that's the equivalent of like raids, which all have some kind of gimmick since the days of WoW. You don't really have options like respecking or player housing to the same degree.
Yeah,
that and
I started off with 4th edition, and it actually took me a few sessions to figure out, like, wait a second, DPS isn't a concept in this? But I got there.
Yeah, I've seen some people equate the striker role in 4th edition to DPS, and there is some DNA to it.
Yeah.
But it's not that much different
yeah.
than, say, the rogue has always been. Like, the rogue has always been the backstabber, has always been the glass cannon.
Right. But there is something to this idea of like, 5th edition characters are superheroes, but not so much in a bad way, because the point I want to work to here is, what are heroes of mythology but ancient superheroes? You probably hear that point bandied about quite a bit.
I've bandied it myself.
Yeah, and so that's kind of the idea that I had here, because you hear that Heroes of Tara is set in Iron Age Ireland, and sure, there's mythology involved, but the first assumption for many is that it's a down and dirty, gritty, grimy, and tough, low magic kind of setting, like Conan the Barbarian kind of deal, It's like, no, this is actually, Iron Age high fantasy, where things are kind of colorful and dramatic and explosive in many ways. And
you know what's strange
the
about
characters
that?
you play are kind of superheroes. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Is the fact that you look at the exploits of Conan, and he's not too far removed from a superhero character himself.
Oh no, to read the way that Robert E. Howard writes about the guy, like, he is not a normal person by any means.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a whole thing to get into on its own. I could go on about Conan the Barbarian all night. I love that stuff. And there still is certainly some DNA of that, kind of grittier barbarian adventuring spirit in Heroes of Tara as well, certainly, right alongside the high-minded drama and magic and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But the point that I was getting to is 5th edition is actually uniquely suited to what I was trying to achieve here in 5th edition with Heroes of Tara, because when you look at the source material in Irish mythology and you read the feats and the achievements of a hero like Cuchulainn. You might know Cuchulainn as like the primary hero to Irish mythology, or at least the competing claimant to the title of primary hero right alongside Fionn Bacul.
Mm-hmm.
People have called Cuchulainn the Irish Achilles. And in a lot of his stories, the narration makes a point to give a name to a lot of his moves, like they're martial arts moves or something. You have Cuchulainn achieving such things as like the cat feat, the spear feat, the cloven apple. That one is not a real feat. That was right off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
No, like the cloven flagstone. And then all of these names have like a V in front of them, so they're almost like this matter of record in a way, and that they achieve these specific things. Like I say, it's almost like a martial arts movie with all the special moves.
Mm-hmm.
And so, keeping with Cuchulainn, he provided the archetype and inspiration for one of our 3 classes, the biggest martial bruiser of the 3 being the Warrior of the Red Branch. The Red Branch is kind of the warrior lodge or the social club that Cuchulainn and many others are a member of, and your character would be a member of if you took this class. And what 5th edition does is it provides this wonderful structure or scaffolding in terms of how the template of 5th edition lays out character progression. Every level of the character progression, you get these feature descriptions. Level 1, you get 2 or 3 class features. Level 2, you get a few more, and then they start to kind of slow down after that. But each of these feature descriptions in the classes gave me a wonderful opportunity to go into the rich flavor and detail of each one of these moves that Cuchulainn did in the source material and that I put straight into the page of the book. For instance, I'm looking at the Student of Scatha subclass of the Warrior of the Red Branch, and he can achieve such things as the Measured Stroke, the Pierced Flagstone, the Cat Feat, the Javelin Feat, the Thunder Feat, like I said, and these are all, martial arts moves taken right out of the source material, and I don't think any other game system would have allowed me to lay them out on the page in such rich detail, where I can convey lore at the same time that I'm conveying mechanics. Where, say, if this was like a D20, D100 skills-based system, like in basic roleplay or something like that, I wouldn't be able to just lavish all of this descriptive detail onto the page in the same way I am with 5th edition. So
there are some games that could do it as well, but that is a forest for the trees kind of thing. But
right.
Speaking of that, I think one of the other major things that you did is, instead of doing a list of races, which is going to be redundant because everyone's going to be some variety of humanoid, you instead have the collection of tribes. The major ones, the outlander ones, and the hidden ones.
I mean, functionally, mechanically speaking, they're the same as the races from the 2014 book. But yeah, in terms of actual flavor and world building, they are all, well, most of them. I mean, some of the hidden tribes are actually where you get a bit more fantastical. But by and large, with a few exceptions, these are all humans. Just mortal people here on our Earth, even if a mythologized version of Earth. It seemed appropriate, an appropriate word choice, if nothing else. Race certainly would not have sat well. So it worked well, simply for the setting, and everything was informed by the setting in such a way.
And the three classes that you have is the primary. The Fenid, which you mentioned, is something akin to the to a caster. Uh,
That's the Feely.
yeah,
The Fenid is more of your wilderness warrior ranger type.
and
I know we have
probably
two
won't
F names in there. Yeah.
probably won't suffer the same fate that the Cannon Ranger has had, because that thing has been cursed since the days of AD&D.
Oh, I know. It's a tragic story, and yeah, I set out when designing the Fenid. In many ways, I kind of set out with the objective in mind to kind of right those wrongs in a way, and just make my personal best attempt at my own version of a ranger. And I think I got pretty darn close to a good try here.
And what I do find amusing with the Fenid in that regard, contrasting it with the Ranger, is it ends up reinforcing something I had stated a long time ago, which is that Rangers having inherent casting is not a move I would have made personally.
Yeah, casting is a subclass choice for these guys, for the Fenid.
Now, in the case of the Ranger, it's because a lot of the casting they could do, the Druid can do, and better. So there's that issue.
Yeah, they just kind of get half and half, and they're not really good at anything.
But there's also the fact that when I think of characters in media that provide the best example of what the Ranger archetype, as far as the class fantasy, should be, I know a lot of people will bring up Legolas, and if we're talking about him in the movies, I could certainly see it. But a bigger one that I always refer to is John Rambo in First Blood.
Yes. Oh, that's an excellent one.
If I had to use something a little more recent, I could also bring up Geralt of Rivia.
Sure. My personal favorite would be Jeremiah Johnson, that old Robert Redford film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the point is that they're more about being out in the wilds rather more than anything else, and things like favorite enemy and favorite terrain cause a bit of problems sometimes when you have to hyper focus on this one type. When you look at anybody who's doing any sort of hunting or tracking, that's not how they're going to operate.
Right. Yeah, they're familiar with everything that's out there, not just their favorite enemy isn't just bears. They're gonna know all the tracks that they come across.
Yeah. And of course, with the Warrior of the Red Branch, you already mentioned that you wanted to, and actually, I was going to bring up how that's kind of expanded compared to the Fighter, but I would like to instead pivot to the fact that all three, unless I'm mistaken, all three of the classes that you have here, the Fenid, the Feely, and the Warrior of the Red Branch, all develop their own specific resource. Whether it be cunning points, whether it be the healing arts, or the glory points in the case of the Red Branch.
Yes. For the Feely, it's invocation points. And each class earns their points in a different way, incentivizing different play styles per class. For example, as I said, there is a spellcasting ability check for any spellcasting in the game at this point. With the exception, actually, of the Fenid subclass that does have what I call intuitive spell casting, where they don't have to make the check, but making those checks is how Feely score their invocation points. The Warriors of the Red Branch, very straightforward. They score their points by striking enemies down to 0 hit points or scoring critical hits. The Fenid are rewarded their points by playing a bit more strategically, by emphasizing teamwork and positioning. By, say, you get a Fenid will receive a point if a ally succeeds at an attack roll against an enemy, thanks to the assistance of the Fenid. If they, say, did the help action or were, giving some kind of pack tactics or flanking benefit or whatever you would like to say for that. But And then, of course, all of these points feed back into specific class feature abilities that each of these guys can pull off. And this is, in a way, perhaps what balances the classes, because a lot of their abilities are far beyond, say, what a fighter or a ranger can achieve. At least basically. Once you get into the subclasses, fighters and rangers perhaps get a bit more pep in their step. But for instance, the Fenid, one of their core abilities is something they unlock at the 6th level called the Stick Test. The Stick Test might sound like an odd name, but it has a lower explanation that the feature description goes into. But mechanically, the idea is that they can choose 2 spaces, at least 10 feet apart, anywhere within a 30-foot radius of themselves, and as their movement action on that round, they can immediately transition between those chosen spaces. They have to choose the order in which they proceed through the spaces, and once they arrive at the last space, their movement is over. But as long as it's within the bounds of this 30-foot radius, it is functionally and effectively teleportation. But in terms of flavor and lore description, what they are doing is they are tumbling and leaping and maneuvering around the battlefield in such a deft and nimble way, avoiding all enemies and obstacles that it might as well be teleportation. And this costs a few cunning points, which kind of really incentivizes, that point management, which I think is a layer of gameplay that players are always pretty stimulated by. It's something, it gives them something to think about when it's not their turn. When the turn initiative is going around the table and it's coming up to them, they can be thinking, all right, what do I want to spend my cunning points on? Or, ooh, I need to make my cunning points back. What can I do to get my cunning points back while achieving these specific objectives that have been given, consistent to the theme of the class? So it all just kind of organically feeds into a play style that ends up simulating the role play of your chosen class. It just all kind of comes back on itself in a pretty wonderful and flavorful way.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. And you kind of hinted at this when talking about the achievements of Kukulin, but when it comes to the feats, there's an interesting thing there of each feat having a option of taking honorific titles. And was that the direction you were going with that concept? To give a kind of narrative hook to feats?
Yeah, just add that little extra dash of flavor to make it seem like it's not just a numbers boost that is otherwise inconsequential to your character. To say, if you take Polearm Master in your basic 5th edition character, all that's really saying about your character is, hey, this he's a spear guy. You see this dude hanging out and he's always going to have a spear on hand. He's like, that's just his layout. And it doesn't really say anything in a roleplay sense of, like, how does that character express his affinity for fighting with a spear? And I felt like having these honorific titles that come along with a feat really kind of help sell that flavor, and also, again, are just uniquely suited to this kind of setting where you have these Iron Age warriors who are all about boasting and spreading their reputations and adding these honorifics to their name. So, like, let's see, for instance, I'm looking at the feats right now, just choosing a random one. Yeah, Master Artisan. Here's one where it's not necessarily a combat-focused feat, but it makes you far more adept at crafting, reduces the resource requirements for the crafting system, etc. But at the bottom here, it says you may take an honorific title, such as the Clever-Handed, Wonder Worker, or of the Golden Tongs, of the Golden Loom, of the Golden Chisel, etc. And I just think players really love having these extra little things to work with, where when they are role-playing their character's first entrance into a feasting hall, they get to actually have kind of this little list of names that they can rattle off for themselves and, puff out their chest and feel good about their character a little bit, And it's something for the NPCs through the DM to know them by, and it really just is another way by which you can root yourself in that setting.
Yeah, since you brought up feasting halls, of course, there's the fact that you do put a bit of emphasis on things like the laws of hospitality.
Yeah, yeah. Because this is a fully realized, at least as closely as I can get it, setting, which also reflects the traditions and life ways of the culture that occupies this setting. Where it is not a historically accurate representation of historical Ireland. Obviously, it is an imaginary version of how Ireland might have been at that time, but we still get pretty close to the point where there are these governing principles by which these people lived, as you will find in any pre-modern society and in many modern societies today as well, where tradition is not just a lifestyle choice, it is the way by which your community lives or dies. Literally, if you do not maintain these systems of tradition, then the clan will eventually just kind of go apart, and the people will wander away and go join other clans with stronger traditions, with a more cohesive sense of community. Because the idea is that you got to keep together in this harsh world where the wilderness is always just outside your door, threatening the the tender flame of human life. And the player characters are heavily advised through the descriptions given in this book that it would be useful to them to also uh, role play according to these ideas. It is not a mechanically enforced thing. There are, but if somebody reads this book, they are going to kind of have this ethos pouring off of every page when they read it, where they are eventually going to feel immersed in like almost like the morals of the society, the traditions, such as hospitality being important, because a character will know a player will know that if they cause trouble in the hall of an NPC, then the laws of hospitality are going to come down hard on them, and it will actually benefit the player to know those laws quite well. Because if the DM knows those laws better than the player, and if the player messes up, the DM might not be so forgiving and might kind of bring social consequences down on that character's head. And that's far more significant perhaps in this game than your basic D&D game, because in your basic D&D game, what is a dungeon delving adventurer but like a particularly well-armed vagrant? They're not really rooted to any communities. They wander where they may. They often leave their homes far behind on some grand adventure to which they may never return. They are strangers wherever they go in many adventures. But here in Heroes of Tara, Ireland is not a very large place. You can travel for maybe only about a week or two away from home before, you find yourself circling back again. The player characters are going to be rooted in their communities. Their clans, their families, their chieftains are all going to be resources upon which the player is encouraged to rely. The territory of their clan is kind of a home base to which they can continue returning to in between their adventures. At least so long as they, stay on the good side of their community by observing these traditions. So it all, it's all to the end of having the players just really feel the sense of not only that they are immersed in the world, but that their characters are rooted in the community and in the culture.
And we have seen an uptick of games where the player characters are meant to be associated with the culture that they're in. In some form or another, whether it be having knowledge of different parts of the setting, whether it be focusing on a particular area and knowing people within it. Like, say, if you're playing something like Shadowrun or Cyberpunk,
right?
It's not on one level or another. Everybody has some degree of context, because when everybody's having their adventures taking place in one city, everybody knows somebody, or knows a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy who may have done a thing.
White Wolf games are also very much about those networks of relationships.
Because no man is an island, and even when it comes to the pulp heroes of the days of old, there were recurring characters that they had some manner of association with. on a repeat basis. Uh, even if it's not as prevalent in some cases. Like we brought up Conan earlier, and his biggest squeeze throughout a lot of his mythos is Balin.
Yes. Yeah.
Uh,
Was it Queen of the Pirate Shore? Was that her
Queen
title?
of the Black Coast.
The Black Coast. That's right.
Mm-hmm. And with Solomon Kane, he's had plenty of friends. One of whom taught him some rudimentary magic and allowed him to carry the staff of Solomon.
Yes.
And in the case like Kull, well, Kull is a damn king, so by this axe I rule. So you have to have associations in that kind of sense.
Right. And and like I said, Ireland is not a very large place. It's actually a landscape that you might be able to keep track of relatively well, especially with the assistance of the hex maps that I provide in the back of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Once you progress through a campaign long enough and you've developed some history with the communities throughout the island, you might have some big red X's across certain hexes on that map where it's like, oh no, that hex is the territory of a certain clan where they still haven't gotten over that cattle raid we did back when we were all level 5. We better go around that hex instead of trying to go through it. And you develop that kind of history.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. And when it comes, I think one of the other things that I couldn't help but notice is making an attempt to put in social encounters, which is something that is, for a game that claims to be able to do any sort of fantasy role playing, is sorely lacking in core. And even all of the updates in the 2024 edition, some of which I think are going to cause problems more than solutions, doesn't address this. A bit beyond, it's just a skill roll, which, if someone's playing a Diplomancer, I don't think it's going to be satisfactory.
Right, exactly. So yeah, these social encounters that I put in there, gosh, how many do I have? We have a boasting competition for the brawny warriors of the party, where they can get up at a feast and trade boasts with one another and talk about the great feats and achievements that they've had in their adventures, and all of this to the end of competing to decide who is the most illustrious and glorious warrior in attendance, and who is deserving of what is called the champion's portion, which were traditionally the loins or the hindquarters of the boar, the choicest cut of meat at the feast. And of course, this comes with a nice little mechanical benefit where anybody who dines upon the champion's portion gets a little boost that mechanically I believe is pretty much equivalent to the actual spell champion's feast. Then we have bardic competitions where bards and other such poetically inclined characters can trade quips and compete with one another at their oration and their performing skills. Those are the two more competitive PvP encounters, you might say. Whereas then, after that, we actually have Brehon judgments, because a Brehon might be a term that folks are unfamiliar with outside of Irish history and folklore. They were kind of the traditional judges of the society. They were the law keepers. They were the ones who, it was a non-literate society, so the learned caste of scholars memorized everything. And these guys, their particular job was memorizing the many intricate laws and precedents of the land. And the Brehon judgments is where, if your character is a filly with the Brehon subclass, or perhaps if you are just a well-respected member of your community who happens to have proficiency in the Brehon law skill, you are able to preside as a judge over a legal dispute between two NPCs. However, I encourage that players be given control of these NPCs during the course of the encounter, just so that the GM is not, burdened with just two more characters to keep track of when they're already conducting a pretty complex encounter. And so other characters who might not be players who might not be engaged with the encounter are, occupied by giving a little stake and something to do in there. But all of these social encounters. Oh, and of course, there's the druid ceremonies where you're trying to hoax or abjure spirits on behalf of your community to achieve a certain end. But all these encounters are perhaps maybe a little bit cumbersome.
Mm-hmm.
I must admit, there's a few pages of rules description for the procedure of how they are played out. But the trade-off is that, again, just like the thesis for this entire book is that everything is directed towards giving that detail of simulation so that the characters can just really feel like they're a part of this world and that they're actually taking part in the community. They're not just random adventurers passing through. And hopefully these social encounters actually achieve that goal, because it is very easy to have a go at D&D for the lack of social encounter mechanics, and it's true that as a pillar, social encounters are underserved, as is wilderness exploration, and both of them do need more attention. However, I did discover in this process that it's not a very easy thing to make it both rewarding and easy.
Mm-hmm.
Easy to get into, that is. Nice, quick, lightweight rules. It requires some description. It requires some procedure, some equations,
Yeah.
a little bit of reading on the player's part to really carry these things out, especially in something as specific as a setting like this, where people don't really know what the heck a Brehon judgment is, so that takes some explaining.
I can certainly see the difficulties, but part of the reason I take the piss out of D&D's lack of support on this kind of thing is twofold. One, there's the boast of, oh, you can use this to run any kind of fantasy, which I have ripped that argument to shreds for decades.
I do not agree with that one. That's very true. Yeah.
But there was also the fact that when it came to these sorts of things, and even things like base building, the official response was, oh, we left it blank so that people could come up with it on their own, which is probably the laziest counter argument you could make in that kind of thing. It's one of those cases where you may have been better off saying we hadn't quite nailed it down yet.
Oh gosh, I mean, just look at ship combat and the Spelljammer rules that were put out for 5th edition.
I didn't even read that.
Oh gosh. It's, 5th edition has probably seen the worst case of DM neglect in the history of D&D, that's for sure. I mean, a lot of people just go back to, like, 2nd edition's realm management rules, as far as I can tell. I know personally Matt Colville had provided some 5e rules, but I never really got into those too much.
I personally, if I want to do the macro play of realm management, I personally use Seeds of Wars. Which is very much built for that kind of thing, and does so in a way that I personally find appealing. And it is very much a successor to the old Birthright rules, which were built for that kind of thing.
Right.
They were built for the whole realm management thing, since that's one of the selling points with being certain characters, is that you get a holding, you get followers, and all of that.
Right.
But Whereas as time has gone on, that's gone by the way, and instead you're just you're still a vagrant. You're just a high level vagrant, which there can certainly be an appeal.
Place to hang out, yeah.
Yeah, there can certainly be an appeal to being a high level vagrant. I mean, Gotrek and Felix are pretty much that in terms of their stature.
I love those guys. Yeah, they're great.
I mean, although in their defense they have good reason for that, because Gotrek is a slayer. He doesn't give a shit about that kind of thing. He's trying to die. He's just shit at it.
Right. Yeah.
And Felix is still on a wanted list for killing one of the Emperor's guards.
Yeah, riling up the window tax riots. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So getting that level of attention isn't in his best interest, lest bounty hunters or worse things show up.
So yeah, there are premises like that where you're not really rooted to anything, or if it's the idea that you are just a couple of bastards like Fafford and the Grey Mouser or
Mhm.
something like that, fair enough. But yeah, I guess Heroes of Tara does kind of come with the buy-in that you are part of your community, unless you take the outlaw background,
Mhm.
in which case you are then defined by the inverse of you are not really allowed around any community. Taking the outlaw background in Heroes of Tara is kind of actually electing for playing the game on hard mode, you might say.
Uh, I can certainly get that, and because of that one particular end goal that I'm curious if this could be supported in at least an individual GM level, if not through the book itself, is the player characters creating their own clan.
Yeah,
Not in
well,
terms of the tribe thing like the races, but creating their own faction.
right, absolutely. Yeah, I'd say there would certainly be precedent for creating a new clan, which would be, probably gathering together many clanless individuals from, you might say, the dregs about Ireland and raising them up and making this great thing out of nothing. But the more likely course is that you would have your character ascend to leadership of their own of the clan to which they already belong, the clan that they grew up in, that has their family, their history, their community, the one that has perhaps served as the home base for them throughout the majority of their leveling experience. Well, once they get to high level, maybe it's time to take that clan over, or maybe the DM was nice enough to kind of make a convenient vacancy by having the NPC chieftain die and he needs a replacement. But an interesting thing about Celtic society, historically speaking, and something that I included here in the lore descriptions, is that chieftains are not necessarily expected to rule for life. It's actually quite a bit of meritocracy is at work here. The law of the land, Brehon law, does not defend the incumbency of chieftains. If a chieftain starts getting old, if the strength begins to leave their sword arm or their wits begin to fail them, then the people of that clan are within their rights to say, chieftain, we love you, you've served long and well for us, but you're just not cutting it anymore. Our people need to be led by a vital, strong leader, so we're going to have to ask you to step down, and we're going to find the best candidate from among us, because the chieftains and the royalty of Iron Age Ireland didn't really rely on any claim to special blood right or divine mandate or anything like that. It was literally just kind of a case of king of the hill, of the strong ruled. Perhaps the more enlightened way would be that the capable ruled, the eloquent, the wise,
Mhm.
the fair, whatever best appealed to their community. Because even the commoners in a clan had a say in that community through right of kinship. They're not just like serf peasants working the land for these chieftains. They're often related to the chieftain by blood. A clan is a extended network of families, which really kind of levels the playing field and increases the familiarity between these different social castes, which also, familiarity brings about mobility, where if your character starts off with the outlaw background, that doesn't mean you're signing up to be doomed throughout your entire play course to level 20 to still be held as an outlaw that entire time.
Mhm.
You can probably rise up from being an outlaw level 1 to running your own clan by the end of the campaign just as easily as any other player character. But it would be the clan that a clan that perhaps already existed in the game world, more likely, because every piece of land is kind of already taken up. The real estate is at a premium, and these clans are also kind of institutions that have been around for generations and generations. The boundaries between their territories are almost like a matter of tradition that very rarely shift. So you're, as players and player characters, you're kind of stepping into this world that is, it's not so detailed by me that it's like every clan territory is detailed in the map. A lot of that is still open to the DM to arrange or just to be filled in, as you need. Just lay down tracks right in front of the train. Uh, But conceptually, yeah, it won't be so much building a new clan as your character kind of rising to the top of those clans that are already there in this very complex social system that I've tried to bring to life.
Mhm. Yeah. And with that,
But I should say, realm management rules are not part of the game quite
Yeah.
yet, but that is something that I am planning on including in future publications.
Yeah, I figured that would be something that putting it in this book, which is already pretty packed as is. The player's guide is 407 pages. Might
Yeah.
be pushing your luck a little bit. It's something that should really be in its own book.
Yeah, I am hoping to achieve the traditional trilogy of, the player's guide, a book of monsters, and a DM's guide. In this case, it would be a VM's guide because just for the flavor of the setting, we refer to the game master as the verse master in Heroes of Tara rules. So it would be a verse master's guide, which I think would be most likely to include the realm management rules.
Mm-hmm. Which I could certainly get that. Now, with that said, there's definitely a lot to this, and I do want to sincerely thank you to come all the way to my monastery and enjoy the madness that happens here.
It's been a pleasure, a real delight. I'm very grateful for your interest and just being such a gracious host and having me over for this chat.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lovely monastery.
Yeah. And anytime you see fit to return, the door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged.
All right, it'll be a pleasure. Thank you.
And of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there will be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here on the open bar of the internet.
May I have just one last little line where if any listeners are interested in Heroes of Tara, they can find us on drivethroughrpg.com, and we also have a steadily growing Discord community to which you are all heartily invited.
Mm-hmm. Of course, and I will put those links in the description. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.
上楽な情少年完全